Hello everybody, welcome to Spiritual Metaphysics 101. My name is Yaakov and I'm your host. I'm also a teacher of spiritual metaphysics, and I always like to start each episode with a brief description first of my spiritual path, which is A Course in Miracles. Here's a picture of it. This is the edition. It's kind of a handy carry-around edition, A Course in Miracles. And we're going to be discussing a particular section in A Course in Miracles, which is my spiritual path. But I honestly believe that if you're on a spiritual path, one of love and forgiveness and compassion and undoing the suffering in the world and in yourself, then what I'll be reading and discussing in A Course in Miracles should certainly be familiar to you, and hopefully is a path that you're in some way practicing yourself. So this section is in the text of A Course in Miracles, and it's called Your Brother's Sinlessness. And I always like to do some preliminary comments before I get into the reading. Your brother's sinlessness is very foundational, I believe, to almost every spiritual path, where you're aligning your thinking with love to the exclusion of nobody. So that would definitely mean that your brother, whether it's an enemy or a friend, an acquaintance, a family member, a co-worker, if you're aligning your thinking with love, then you must be willing at a very fundamental level within your own mind to see that person as sinless. Otherwise, you're engaging in attack thoughts. And attack thoughts are of the ego. And when we're in our ego mind, then we're certainly not loving. We're critical and we're judgmental. We're blaming. We're projecting guilt that we feel within ourselves onto other people, and we get angry at them. So this particular section in the text is, as I say, very fundamental. Let's read a little bit of it. It says, the opposite of illusions is not disillusionment. What is the opposite of illusions then? It's truth. Now we're starting to discuss what is the truth about us and our brothers and sisters. Well, the truth is that they're sinless. They are made in the image and likeness of God. Certainly they may have, as we have, gone off a loving, sinless, guiltless path and know themselves as sinful. And I think of myself as sinful, so I can relate to that. Now the Course says that when two people are insane, the only way out of that predicament is for one person to go into their right mind and become sane, right-minded, if the other person is still wrong-minded. Well, this is the journey, if you will, towards seeing and perceiving and experiencing the sinlessness in all our brothers and sisters. And then we know it in ourselves. And it only takes a willingness on our part, not an absolute knowing. We're so stuck in our ego dream of blaming and judging and seeing other people as sinful and feeling deep down in our minds that we're sinful, that we can't make that transformational leap without the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is within our minds. So we're willing to turn the thoughts of sinfulness and blame and guilt and anger and fear over to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit then, without our help, because we've really surrendered, so we're really a prism through which the light of forgiveness can flow. The Holy Spirit transforms our perception from one of seeing our brother as sinful to seeing our brother as sinless. And the Course in Miracles says that the dynamics of that are beyond our understanding. We don't understand what the Holy Spirit accomplishes through us. If we fully understood it and had full knowledge, we wouldn't be asleep or think we're asleep and in this world. We'd be fully back home in heaven, where pure knowledge exists. Okay, so we're asleep. We're having this dream of projected guilt and sinfulness. we let go of it and are willing to turn our thoughts of attack and our suffering over to the Holy Spirit. And then we let go. And at that point, the Holy Spirit, the Tao, the Buddha, the Christ, the Krishna, whatever it is that you follow as your higher power of love, then flows through us quite naturally. Now, I said that the Course is clear. We don't understand the dynamics. That means that I don't either, certainly. But I have an inkling as to what happens. At least I can speak some words concerning the mechanism. And what I think happens is that we are becoming less opaque, and we're becoming a clearer prism just by undoing the guilt in our own minds. If I condemn a brother, I'm condemning myself. If I'm willing to not condemn the brother and forgive him, then I'm willing to not condemn myself, and I'm willing to know forgiveness. And in that sense, I'm less opaque. Things out in the world become clearer in terms of my vision. They're no longer clouded with sin and guilt. At that point, I experience the holy instant. The Course calls it the miraculous holy instant of knowing I'm one with my brother and I'm one with God. And in that knowing, it transcends the dream. The dream is, we awaken from the dream momentarily. Or at least we're heightened in our consciousness so that we know that we're dreaming, and we're more a lucid dreamer rather than a fully asleep dreamer. Our awareness and our consciousness has been heightened. We may not be willing to let go of the dream in its entirety, with all the figures in the dream and the script in the dream, but we see it more for what it is. And that is that it's a classroom in which we can learn our holy instant of forgiveness. And when we do that, when we do that, we are performing our function in the world. And our function is to be the light through forgiveness and our willingness to be the Holy Spirit's messenger of forgiveness. Well, let's read a little bit further. It says, truth is the opposite of illusions because it offers joy. If you've ever fully turned over all of your sinful projections to your higher power, you know what this means on an experiential level. You've experienced the joy. Those of us that have lived most of our lives unwilling to turn over the projected sin and guilt, and we hold on to being right and holding on to our attack thoughts, do not know full joy. We know vengeful feelings. We know blaming and anger, but that is not the joy of our higher power. And somehow the ego has convinced us that vengeful attack thoughts and being right is salvation. That's why we've been so deluded. We really think, and this is where the tiny mad idea of separation from God and from each other really stems from. We really think that our salvation, our very existence, depends on being right and proving that other people have been victimizers and that they're wrong. And by scapegoating them, we'll know our redemptive self, true self. And that is the basis for suffering that the Buddha came really to teach to undo. Stop the suffering through your attachment to being right about the world and blaming it, or pursuing false idols, which all of us in this society, in the West certainly, can relate to. We think that our salvation depends on being the richest or the most powerful or the most beautiful or the most intelligent. Can you see how that sets up a dualistic dynamic? I'm better, you're less. Or the ego is satisfied with a dualistic dynamic of you're better and I'm less. Doesn't matter as long as there's that dynamic of separation. There's I as the subject, and you are the object of my perception, and I see you as different from me. Your needs are different, your interests are different. You certainly are less innocent than I am. I'm the face of innocence. This is the ego scenario, and you're the face of sin and guilt. Why, how else could we have this world as we by and large know it, except through blaming, condemning, judging, criticizing, and making ourselves this face of innocence? But as it says here, the truth is the opposite of this illusion of blame. And the truth brings us true joy. So then there's that age-old question, would I rather be joyful, or would I rather be right about my judgments? That's always the question. Or as Jesus, who is the source of this Course in Miracles text, asks very pointedly, are you willing to see your brother as sinless? Now most of us, I would think, if we're honest, would say, heck no. I'm not willing to see my brother as sinless. Based on my whole edifice of my life and my existence, the way I've built it and the way I've made it up, it's dependent on my brother being sinful. Thereby setting up that dualistic dynamic, if you're sinful, I'm sinless. And that means that God, whom we're terribly frightened of as frightened children, that means that God is not going to judge and smite me because I'm sinless. God's going to smite you because you're sinful. That's the whole nature of scapegoating. I've mentioned this in other episodes where the ancient Hebrews in the encampment, once a year, I guess it was, would take a goat and by some ritual or another would place all of their sins from the previous year onto the goat and then drive the goat out of the encampment. And this symbolized through the ritual some kind of undoing of all their sins. Well, we've taken the Hebrew ritual one step further, and the ego is quite brilliant about this. How about every day? Forget once a year. Why don't we judge our brothers and scapegoat them all the time? Marriages dissolve, work-related colleagues, get embroiled in all kinds of difficulties. Countries go to war. As a matter of fact, this whole Course in Miracles was written by Helen Schuckman and her work colleague, Bill Thetford. And it started out that, they were so unhappy with each other in the workplace that Bill finally said to Helen, there's got to be another way. And she said, I don't know what that is, but I'm willing to, with you, find out what that might be. And that was the opening for the Holy Spirit or Jesus to come into Helen's mind and dictate to her the text and the workbook lessons and so forth of A Course in Miracles over the next 8 years prior to its publication. So the given situation is one of dualism. I'm right, you're wrong. Or you're right, and I'm wrong. And that dynamic really is what the Course calls special love. Special love is where I see I'm lacking, but I find somebody in my own mind who has the ability to correct all of my deficiencies. And so I fall in love with them. This is special love. We idealize them, we put them on a pedestal. This could be a political candidate, it could be a celebrity whom we idealize, it could be a sports hero, or it could be somebody we meet and fall in love with and want to establish an intimate relationship with and marry. Special love is just as vicious as special hate, where I see you as wrong and I'm right. If I see you as you're right and I'm wrong and I need you to replace the wrongness within me, I take you as hostage. And special love and special hate are two sides of the same ego coin. Well, let's see what the text goes on to say here. So truth is the opposite of illusions. And in the truth, we know true joy. So to change illusions is to make no change. Now, what does he mean by that? To change illusions is to make no change. This is very fundamental. This is a course in cause, not effect. Effect is where you change the illusion and hope that you'll in some way know peace and joy. The course is teaching, don't change the illusion. It's illusory. Go to the cause of the sin and the guilt in your mind. And the corrective measure is to turn it over by willingness to forgive to the Holy Spirit or to the higher power of your understanding. That's at the level, the metaphysical level of the mind. There's the difference. So here, Jesus is saying to change illusions, divorce and marry someone else, quit the job and go somewhere else, any number of corrective behavioral level, form level changes makes no change. The search for joy in misery is senseless. So there's nothing at the level of the world and the body that you and I can take and know true joy. This is a course in cause. We must go to the cause to know true joy. And as this section says, we find it in the willingness to perceive our brothers as sinless. That is so abstract. There's nothing concrete about that. Now, at the level of behavior, you might call somebody and make amends. Or the next time you see them, you might be friendlier towards them and hug them and show them that you care for them. But it begins with the abstract, metaphysical change at the level of mind, where you're, as I said earlier, letting go of being right, letting go of that projection of sin and guilt onto them, and giving up to the Holy Spirit all of those ego thoughts. That's purely at the level of mind. And the mind is not in the body. We've discussed that. It's not the brain. The mind is a formless, abstract, metaphysical power, if you will, that we're all created as. The Course calls it the Christ mind. When we know we're one in the Christ mind, at that abstract metaphysical level, then I see my brother as sinless, and I know true joy. If I simply try and change at the level of the world and the body, rearrange the chairs on the Titanic, if you will, I'm thinking now in this political season, that's basically what is it's proffered as the solutions. Let's do it this way instead of that way. Doing it that way got us into the trouble. So let's do it this way. Always at the level of some doing. Let's change the behavior and the form. Elect me, don't elect him. Kick him out and elect me. You know, endless ideas which basically trade on the dynamic of dualism and sinfulness. They're the problem. Get rid of them and I'm the solution. Rather than saying, I see my brother as sinless. He may be misguided as to the behavior and the ideas that he's bringing forth to solve these problems, but I love him. And I know that I've been as mistaken to think that true joy and true happiness would in any way be instigated at the level of form. Nobody in the political world talks that way. They'll talk about religiosity, maybe. That comes up as a small, minute part of maybe a political campaign. I mean, the idea that somebody's of the wrong religion, somebody's of the wrong faith, they don't believe correctly. Well, I'm getting off into some political, but it's a good example of how we are wrong-minded. And the point is that the search for joy in misery at the level of form is senseless. So here he goes on to say, joy is eternal. You can be sure indeed that any seeming happiness that does not last is really fear. So we're talking about eternal joy. We're talking about endless joy. Now again, this is at a very abstract level. Endless, eternal joy, steeped in right-minded forgiveness with the Christ vision, has nothing to do with outward experiences, circumstances, form. It has everything to do with the content of our minds. Am I walking around? Are you walking around in the world with your head, using that as an analogy for the mind, with your head connected with the heads, the minds of everybody else, or are you dissociated and separate? Are you critical? Are you judging? Are you blaming? Are you the victim in a victim story, where you're the hero of a victim story and script? So our practice is getting our heads into the right-minded frame of reference called forgiveness. If somebody were to ask me, what is A Course in Miracles all about? I'd say it's essentially about forgiveness and seeing everybody as sinless. Now, I can't argue that fact with someone who at a behavioral level has done something very criminal or brutal. That I'm not arguing. But there's an ability within us to, as the Course says, see them as calling for love. And the correct response to someone who's calling for love is to forgive them and love them. We all know the story, of course, of the crucifixion and how Jesus exemplified this lesson from the cross and taught love rather than revenge or condemnation. Never mind that the disciples probably got it wrong and started misquoting Jesus. In many respects, they didn't understand the metaphysics that he was teaching. Yes, at the level of form, people do wrong, and they can hurt you on the level of the body, but not at the level of your true identity as Christ minds. And that's who and what we are, minds, not bodies. This undoes the whole fear of death and sickness and poverty and suffering. And it also undoes the whole idea that others are responsible for our fear of death and sickness and poverty. When we identify as bodies, based on a sense of separation from our Creator, who did not create us as bodies, but created us as eternal souls of love, then we see this dynamic of dualism. My body is separate from yours. I'm right and you're wrong. You're the victimizer, I'm the victim. If it wasn't for you, I could be happy, joyous, and free. That's why the whole idea of forgiveness is introduced. It has to be based first on the precondition of condemnation. We have to see the world as condemned, each one of us, to fully understand the salvific nature of forgiveness. If you don't think you condemn people, you don't think you project guilt onto them through your anger and your judgment, then this approach will not work, because you would say, who, me? I don't condemn people. Well, I beg to differ. And the reason I know that is because every one of us who think we're in this dream, in a body, in this world of separate bodies, has fallen asleep to our true identity of unanimity in the Spirit as souls. One Christ soul, created in the image and likeness of God. So we're here, we think. Why are we thinking that we're here? Because we think we have sinned and separated from our Creator. Hence the question again, are you willing to see your brother as sinless? If you're willing, then you turn over your condemnation to the Holy Spirit, who takes it up and transmutes it to love, the true nature of love and joy and happiness. As it said in the first sentence, the opposite of illusions is not disillusionment, it's truth. And the truth is that we're not bodies, we're minds, joined in the Christ, joined in the spirit of love. And when we know that, and so we're winding up this particular episode, when we know that, we can then have the joy and the happiness that is our inheritance and is our true inheritance. As long as we insist on being right and making others wrong and being attack-minded, we certainly will not know the joy that God intends for us. And we've also discussed quite often that there's nothing that the Holy Spirit can do for us against our will. So what we have to do, and this is very consistent with the idea of seek and you shall find, knock and the door is opened, we have to make the decision to be willing. It can't be made for us against our will. So people hit bottom and they say there's got to be another way. Everything that I've tried based on this dualistic idea of I'm right and others are wrong has not led to the peace and the serenity that I want. So then we let go, we make the decision to knock, and the door of forgiveness and love is opened, and we know peace. Do you know that the real purpose of spirituality is not to gain anything? It's to undo all of our misconceptions about who and what we are, to know ourselves. It's not to gain anything. It is to simply undo all of the misconceptions and misperceptions about ourselves and others, so that the truth, which is the opposite of illusions, not disillusionment, but the opposite of illusions is truth. And the truth shall set you free. And you will then know peace. Well, I hope I've brought it full circle here. We've only really done a couple or three paragraphs in this section. Maybe we'll do another episode and continue on this theme. But it is so energizing to know how the simplicity. My wife and I were talking today how simple it is. We weren't discussing that it's easy to do because we're so embedded in our egos, but it is simple. So simply remember to forgive and to know the peace that is the truth and not the illusion. You are as God created you. Shalom, peace, and namaste.